안녕하세요.
And namaste, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the IKF podcast. I am your host, Bagmita, with my co host.
Jhertau Her.
And like all our previous episodes, we are running a series with our IKF Spring Fellows. And with us today, we have Ria Pillai. Ria, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Bagmita and Jhertau.
When we think about India Korea relations, topics like trade, semiconductors, automobiles, and defense usually dominate the conversation. But today's episode, we try to explore a different dimension of the partnership, which is our cities. As India urbanizes rapidly, cities are becoming the front line of climate change, mobility, waste management, sustainability, etc. But are smart cities simply about more technology, or do they require us to think how cities function altogether? So, to discuss this, we are joined by Ria, our IKF fellow whose research examines India Korea cooperation in developing sustainable cities through the framework of urban metabolism. Through her writings, Ria also highlights how traditional systems like Mumbai's Dabbawala network can offer valuable lessons for sustainable urban living. So, welcoming Ria to our podcast and handing over the mic to my co-host Jhertau.
Hello, Ria. Thank you so much.
안녕하세요. Oh,
Hello. Yes, 안녕하세요 as well. Thank you so much for coming to join us for today's podcast. I will start off with the first question today. And I really wanted to ask you, given your work, when people think about India-Korea relations, they usually think of the trade aspects, kind of shipbuilding, semiconductors, and security, especially given military studies. But what made you choose sustainable cities as your research focus?
I think many of us we don't realize in our day-to-day life and even and diplomatic relations, much of all the work that we do today revolves around the idea of a city. I don't think you can imagine South Korea without Seoul or India without New Delhi or Mumbai. Most of the country's work, 90% of the soul takes place in a city. Even each and every single human themselves, we all aspire to eventually land a job and then live in a big city like New York or London. So I think cities are really becoming like the geopolitical center point of today because everything that a person requires revolves around the city. In Aristotle's times and writings, it was the village. The saying used to be there, it takes a village to raise a child. But today I would say it takes a city to raise a human being because so much of who we are depends on the idea of a city.
yeah, very interesting. Ria, why do you think urban sustainability deserves greater attention in India-Korea cooperation?
I think first and foremost, it starts with a very global perspective because in the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the goal number 14, which says we need to work towards building sustainable cities and communities. The other Sustainable Development Goals, they all detail very specific things like zero poverty, eliminate gender discrimination, and so on. But this one is a really interesting one for me because it talks about a community because cities are communities at the end of the day and it focuses on even like the collective perspective of humankind than let's say something more abstract fighting climate change because people inhabit themselves in a city, we surround ourselves in the idea of cityhood. And I think in the context of India and Korea relations, this is something that is not really touched upon because as you both had mentioned previously, when we think of India Korea partnership, we think of it in terms of semiconductor shipbuilding trade and all of that. But I would say that India and South Korea, the recent goal they have of taking bilateral trade to 50 billion, I believe sustainable city cooperation is something that deserves much greater attention from both the governments because cities are basically economic multipliers. Anything you do, any policy or program you roll out, it has to be done in a city. So even if it's trade, semiconductor, shipbuilding, or climate change, it's going to be first rolled out in Seoul, Incheon, Busan, or Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi. So this city is the starting point, and that is why I believe there should be a separate focus given to sustainable city cooperation.
That's so poignant, Ria, what you're talking about. Because Given the conversations around developing technologies, most often people focus on the idea of a smart city. But creating a city that actually sustains and upholds the people that live there is increasingly becoming more important. A lot of your research, it revolves around this term called urban metabolism. For listeners
Mhm.
who may be hearing this term for the first time, what does urban metabolism mean to you?
I would say first we need to draw an analogy with the human body itself. You can't think of yourself without your digestive system, your nervous system, or your cardiovascular system. All of these things have to be in sync for the human body to function properly. It's the same thing for a city. We think of everything in a separate sector, whether it's employment, technology, waste management, they're all seen as different sectors. So, urban metabolism does something similar to biological metabolism in the fact that just like the way all the systems of your body need to work together to create a properly functional human being, similarly, all sectors of governance need to come together to create a smart city. So, let's say a city like Bangalore in India, where I'm currently living. I'm sure you all know that it's really famous for its traffic. It's said that a person spends at least 11 years of their life if they're living in Bangalore just going through traffic. That's how bad the situation is. And that is because transport and land use planning have been seen as two different sectors in Bangalore. They're not integrated.
That is very true because I think we had this discussion in our previous episode also when we talked about smart cities and how South Korea and India can cooperate further. Talking about South Korea, Ria, you have been associated with IKF for a while now, and we have also worked with our neighbor blog. You have worked with our IKF brief as well. Would you like to talk briefly about your experience with IKF so far and working on these two publications of yours?
I think the greatest thing that the IKF Fellowship experience has done for me is that it's given me a chance to really deep dive into South Korea. Like everybody else who has been part of the Hallyu wave, I'm also guilty of thinking of South Korea first in terms of K-pop, K-dramas, especially because I was introduced to South Korea through Crash Landing on You, like many other people. And my image of South Korea has always been like this kind of fantasy land, and not I've not really taken the governance and research aspect of Korea as seriously as I should have. But being with IKF, it's really like, given me that wings to explore what makes South Korea one of the world's most efficient countries in the world, and their recovery to becoming an Asian tiger from being in poverty right from the 1960s. It was really inspiring. And what really struck me was the fact that while working on my research project was to see that how much thought South Korea's public policy domain puts in, because it bridges together everything. Like in India, we treat public policy as separate from economics, politics, sociology, and history. That's not the case in South Korea. And you can actually see that in their urban planning. For instance, while doing my research, I came across this term in South Korea, which is called Building Energy Management System. What they do in all the buildings of all of these cities is that they have automated real-time trackers looking at how much electricity is an apartment using, how much emissions are being generated. Because prior to, I think, at least 10 years ago, 60% of South Korea's emissions used to come from its building infrastructure. So that was in order to combat that, South Korea introduced this BEMS scheme. And after that, what they've done is that they've given tax subsidies, tax breaks to all of the building infrastructure, that insulation and all of that, to reduce emissions. And it also provides subsidized renovation costs for retrofitting in schools and hospitals. So, on this kind of thoughtful urban policy that creates demand for renewable energies, that was something that really struck my mind, because you don't have that in India. Although we have all of these sustainable policies and all, they're all on the supply side. The government is saying, okay, I'll do this, but there's no nudge on the people's behavior. But South Korea looks a lot at behavioral economics in their public policy, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I also really do see that. Like when I lived in South Korea for a year, a lot of the practices you have, especially with the recycling system and the trash system there, it's able to provide a lot of public infrastructure to these efforts that improve the urban life. And I feel like you have such a focus and such a great depth of knowledge about these types of topics, and it really is displayed in your India Brief articles. In one of them, you look at Mumbai's the Dabbawala. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, the Bawala. Yes.
Dabbawala system as a model for sustainability. What inspired you to examine this familiar system from your specific perspective?
So prior to living in Bangalore, I was born and brought up in Mumbai, and my parents also they used to have their lunch catered by these dabbawalas. And back then, it was just like a really efficient business model for me. But now, while I was working on my IKF research project, I realized it's just something so that focuses on community and everyday life can actually be a blueprint for sustainability in what these governments are chasing. They're chasing after technological innovations, more R&D and all, but we don't realize that sometimes the practices that have already existed for over a millennia can help us. Just trying to link the past, present, and future, it brought me to this kind of a research, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. Because in that model, also, I think you argued that India needs its own model rather than just adapting a model from South Korea. So, in that case, what is your viewpoint about the Indian model of this whole system? And also, what can India learn or take from South Korea?
I think one thing that many people don't keep in mind is when they talk about global best practices is that each country has its own peculiarities. No two countries are the same. Just because something works in South Korea, there's no guarantee that the same model is going to work in India because the population size is different, the culture, the historical context, there's a lot of differences, and the way people are going to receive a certain policy will be very different in India versus South Korea. So I think one thing to really recognize is that in Indian cities, our population and our ambition has grown faster than the city's carrying capacity. And that across Gurgaon, Chennai, Mumbai, Delhi, so on. Whereas even in South Korea, most of the people live in Seoul. I think more than half of the country's population lives in Seoul, if I'm correct. And rest of the remaining population is just scattered across the other provinces of South Korea. But you know what causes a city like Seoul to take care of everything that's going on around it? I think at the very objective level, it is good data collection, which is something that India really lacks behind it. It's not that South Korea has something that India doesn't that is preventing Indian cities from being that efficient. It's just that there is an earnest effort to collect data and keep track of how many people are in a place at time. For instance, I'm sure you would be knowing Bagmita that our census is happening after a long delay in India. The data is being taken of how many people are there in the population. That's not the case in South Korea, where everything is updated real time. There's a municipality registration in South Korea. Then there's also this organization called Statistics Korea that does real time updation of how many people, whether it's foreigners, citizens, permanent residents who are in the country so far, where are they located. So it enables all of the policies to reach the intended beneficiaries. Whereas in India, we have first of all outdated data, and then the second thing is when the data is being collected, it's not done on an accurate basis. There's a lot of problem of double counting. For instance, if my Aadhaar is in Mumbai, but I'm living in Karnataka, I'll be counted as living in both Mumbai and Bangalore at the same time. There's no loophole to address that. And as such, India does not have the data to deal with the population it is supposed to cater. So that's something that, what India needs to learn from Korea. First of all, I would say it is good data collection because it's not like we lack in terms of technology or human population. It's just that we don't have the accurate picture of the country that we are dealing with.
No, true, very true. Yeah, I think that is something we definitely should pick up from South Korea and localize it with an Indian model as well. What do you think, Jhertau?
Yeah, I very much agree. I think the South Korean model is very specific culturally to South Korea. The South Korean government is very big on public policy. And a lot of people think also it's a form of also public infringement. This happens in a lot of East Asian countries, especially Japan and China and South Korea, where a lot of times a lot of people will see this government policy as something that infringes on people's rights and on what people are doing. And I know India is trying its best to get more accurate data collection in the lines of what South Korea is doing. And how do you think the government can support this type of on the ground data collection efforts and prevent the double counting that you talked about? Is this an issue with the bureaucracy or the technology that is available to do the counting?
I think first and foremost, it starts with the citizen fatigue in India. In contrast to South Korea, where, as you had mentioned, that people are very much aware of their rights. So think of it as a public infringement and all when the government does too much of oversight. Because I know Korea is really famous for protests and strikes. You recently even had the impeachment of the president taking place just 1.5 years ago. But that's not the case in India, where I have seen myself, for instance, in the city where I live, Bangalore, we have this ward committee system where citizens are allowed to come and participate in the local municipal governance. But that does not happen because more than 80% of the people of Bangalore are unaware that they have such a right that they can participate. But so I would say, and that is because it comes from the citizen fatigue themselves. We are not really up to date with looking at government schemes in terms of how does it affect us, what is the role that we can play. It's like a very top down approach rather than, let's say, bottom up approach which South Korea follows. So I would say if citizens were more active, they had more of the democratic flair, because many people in India have the conception that democracy is just voting once in 5 years, but it's a lot more than that. It can be in the form of participatory budgeting, it can be in the form of citizen volunteer groups to take political initiatives. But that does not really happen in India because most of us, we spend our city lives just looking as work, home, work, home, work, home. But there's no sense of communityhood, I would say, in India, which is preventing this kind of accurate data collection to happen because a government is only as successful as its citizens in the terms of democracy.
Yeah, because yeah, something strikes me is this top-down, bottom-up debate. I also deal with policies in my PhD, and we are very regularly in India coming along these how our policies are very top-down and they need to be bottom-up. Based on which, I like to go back to your Dabbawala model. So with that, it demonstrates reusable packaging, integration with public transport, and also community cooperation. So, do you think policymakers in India sometimes are overlooking these kinds of local innovations or localized ways of looking into policymaking when designing such sustainability policies?
I would say definitely because I think India is still a developing emerging market economy. We really want to give an image that hey, we're on par with Europe, with US and rest of the developed world, quote unquote. And for that reason, I think our policymakers, they love really innovative things like, let's say, smart cities mission. But what is smart cities mission is having real time AI based sensors to monitor traffic and everything, rather than, let's say, looking at let's curb the amount of cars that are there on the road by raising the prices of cars like the way Singapore did. That's a behavioral economics approach. But India really follows a top down approach with the latest technology, latest innovation, than looking at, let's say, people's behavior. How are they going to respond? So I would say, yeah, a lot of policymakers, they do ignore that because we want to look at the future, but we don't look at the fact that many things of the past that are actually truly sustainable and they are rooted in our cultural context. For instance, Mumbai's Dabbawala system, it grew out of the city's heritage because when Mumbai became the center of trade during British Raj under the Bombay presidency, lots of migrants from all over the world came in and they all needed meals being given at a certain time to them. And then that's when this Dabbawala system came up before any of this Swiggy or Zomato thing started, just based on what was available at that time. Okay, we have cycles, we don't need any bikes or anything. And we have these steel tiffins, we don't need plastic packaging. It was what was available at that time. And that love for heritage what has allowed the Dabbawala system to persist even today in the world of Uber Eats, Swiggy, and Zomato. So I think it's looking at what we already have than trying to get what we don't have.
Yeah, because interestingly, we have a lot of traditional systems which has surpassed the technology that we are transferring. Based on which one of your articles is also arguing that sustainability does not always require futuristic technology. That sometimes the solutions already exist within our traditional systems, like that of in India. So, could you expand on that idea a little bit?
Okay, so I personally come from the state of Kerala, and I'm sure many of you know in Kerala, our meals are handed out on banana leaves. If you would have seen all of those pictures of our Onam festival coming out, all of those 10 or 15 course meals on the Sadhya. So I think even in Kerala, if you go to these really traditional localities and places like Palakkad and Alapi, you'll see the packaging is being given in these banana wrapped leaves.
It's so good.
So
It's not
yeah,
just Kerala. Even in Assam and eastern side of India,
correct.
you'll find banana leaves, and also there's this brown leaf. I forgot the name of it, and you're served kachori and everything there. It's a sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And those leaves, they allow the food to remain fresh and also put the good bacteria that actually kills any kind of irritants in the food that, in plastic packaging, you have the issue of microplastics. Sure, plastic is convenient. It keeps the shelf life longer. It's cheap and everything. But at the same time, it's harming the health. Over here, you have a positive multiplier with these banana leaves and other forms of traditional packaging because it does not harm the health. It's cheap, it's locally sourced, and most of all, it's abundant. So, what more do you want? So, it's about looking at our roots, our traditions, and not just neglecting them because we live in this 21st century world. Because sustainable living, it entails not just looking at the future, because the future that we live in today, nothing about it is sustainable. Even with these AI data centers that are coming up, I absolutely agree that AI is the future, but we have to look at the fact that how much of water and energy does it use, and is it really worth it? Because if we need water to drink much more than we need AI is my personal opinion.
Yes, I completely agree. I think there's a lot of difficulties that governments are facing in marrying traditional values with futuristic policies. Drawing on both your research and your experiences in Bengaluru and Kerala, where you're from, is that the correct way to pronounce it? Yes.
It was completely fine, Jared. You
Thank you
really
so
didn't do
much. Okay. What do you think is the biggest challenge that Indian cities are facing today with this policy making?
I think, as I had mentioned before, the basic challenge is lack of accurate data collection, and then the other thing is centralized decision making. For instance, I think India is known for urban policies such as Amrut, which is the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, that has also been formulated by the national government. And so the problem is that the national government does not really know what is the local reality of a city, right? It's only the municipal government who would be knowing what is actually going on over there. The problem in India's decision making is that the municipal government is just seen as an implementer of the policy. It's not the policy formulator. This is really different from South Korea, where around 55% of the national budget is actually spent by the local governments themselves. So the majority of the Korea's budget goes in the city itself and is decided by the city governments. And even the mayoral post of the Seoul, it's considered as whoever it becomes the mayor of Seoul is going to become the president of Korea. That's what the image is. That's not the case in India. You're either the prime minister or you're a bureaucrat, and there's no mayor in between. Ask any Indian, they know Zoran Mamdani is the mayor of New York, but ask them, do you know who is the mayor of your city? Most of them would not even have even heard that a mayor exists in our city. It's the same case for Bangalore, where we have not had a single mayor for the last 12 years, I think, despite being India's largest growing city. That's the kind of fatigue that exists at the local governance level. So, what's really stopping Indian cities from becoming their optimum, I would say, is the fact that we don't think of Indian cities as a city. We think of it as a part of the nation, which it absolutely is, but we don't give cities the importance that they deserve in the national planning. Or let's say we don't move the national planning to the local level.
Yeah, because in the conversation, I can see that we are very much moving towards how the community or the citizens can help and contribute, which again brings us to the bottom up approach of policy, both making and implementation. With that around, and since we also have limited time, I would really like to know how can in ordinary citizens in India contribute to making our cities more sustainable? And is there something that the such as Indian citizens can learn from South Korea in this particular India South Korea engagement as well?
So, to answer the first question, what Indian citizens can do for the cities themselves, I would say first of all is probably look at what are your rights as a citizen, because each municipality has a citizen charter which details what are the services being provided to you. For instance, the citizens of Bangalore complain there are potholes not being filled, our roads are so bad and all. But How many of them know that there's an app called Bangalore Sahaya app launched by the municipality of Bangalore, where you can actually take a picture of any problem you have, upload it on the portal, and then the government will actually try to resolve your problem in the next 48 hours. Ask them how many of them have used it. The answer would be very minimal to none. The same goes for Mumbai. You complain about the floods that take place in your city each and every year, but how many of you actually look at coastal regeneration initiatives? There were so many volunteer groups in Mumbai who tried to do beach cleanups, tried to do mangrove restoration and all, but they did not get support from the citizens themselves. And we live in this age of social media today where everything is digitally connected. You have all the news at your fingertips. We would rather be more engaged with what is going on in one side of the world than looking at what is actually going on in our neighborhood. So we're unaware of what is happening in our own surroundings. And we can see that even in the fact that we don't even know the names of our neighbors anymore when we live in these apartments. That's how unaware we are of our city. You don't know who is living next door either. So that's something to change. And what can Indian citizens learn from South Korean citizens? I think it's just the flair for democracy. South Koreans, I'm not saying that Indians need to go out and protest every day. You've already done a wonderful job with the NEET protest. You got the education minister to resign. Congrats. Look at what's happening in your city. How do you think you would contribute to it? Can you be more involved in participatory budgeting? Because cities such as Mumbai and Pune, they do have the provisions for this. Citizens can deliberate how much of the budget is going to go to which cause. So make sure it's being redirected to the cause that is affecting you the most. Take more attitude surveys. Try to understand with your friends. Speak about things that actually matter, because we discuss cricketers, we discuss Bollywood celebrities, but we don't discuss issues that actually matter. Unlike in South Korea, where it's really important to talk about what are the issues plaguing you. And I think that there's a challenge common to both India and South Korea in sustainable city development is also going to be dealing with the idea of growing loneliness in the urban areas, because both India and South Korea are increasingly becoming really lonely cities. And we talk about SDG 14, it talks about sustainable cities and communities. So India need to focus on bringing back the community back into the action. So that's it from my side.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers during this interview, Ria. And thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your experiences and your research. This conversation, I think, gives us all a really great reminder that sustainable cities are not built through technology. They're not only built through policy, but they're built through people and community. And I hope that people listening to this podcast are able to learn and take that away from this interview, whether it's understanding cities through the framework of urban metabolism that you described earlier, or trying to incorporate traditional values and traditional systems like the Dabbawala system that you talked about. Today's discussion, I think, is going to challenge us to rethink what really makes a city resilient and sustainable, and how we're going to build these cities for the future. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to another episode of the IKF podcast series. We'll be back soon with more conversations exploring fresh perspectives on India-Korea cooperation. Until next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.